Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Everyday Anarchism. I am your host, Graham Culbertson, and Amit Chaudhuri. Welcome back. Thank you for coming on the show again.
Thank you. Thanks. It's a pleasure.
We're recording this on Zoom, which I mean, I'm a little disappointed in. I was hoping we were maybe going to be in Oxford at the same time and be able to record, mostly because I was hoping that if I recorded an episode with you in Oxford, I would get to be an unnamed character in a future Amit Chaudhuri novel. So, I guess I missed my chance on that, but I'm going to have to hope that I pop up someday somewhere.
It might happen. Yeah,
Does it
definitely.
does it ruin it that I asked to be in the novel? Does that defeat the meta effect?
It's the first time it's happened. It's not that people haven't asked me to put in other people in the novel or or have claimed to be in a novel of mine.
Okay, well, I can't believe I'm the first one to have brought up this question because there are events like this. I don't think there's any podcasts in any of your novels, but there are, events where you're meeting people and giving talks and
Right.
everything. So I'll just have to keep hoping.
Yes. Zoom's going to turn up at some point. Yeah.
Okay, so to make this make sense, and hopefully everyone listened to our previous episode. I did want to tell you I went to a movie with a friend yesterday who occasionally listens to my podcast, and he said he listened to a half dozen in the past month or so, and the episode we recorded was his favorite. He
Well,
said
very happy to
every
hear that.
time you spoke, he just found something really interesting and scribbled it down.
Wonderful.
I,
I'm
I
so
mean,
glad.
I should say I feel the same way, and it's a pleasure to be doing this again.
Very kind of you.
Now, last time we were speaking about a book of essays, and so the number of topics we could cover was practically infinite. We can still cover practically infinite topics, but we're here today specifically to discuss this new book novel, if you wish, although I'm not sure it's a novel. I know they call them novels. It's called Chateau Rouge, which means Red Castle, but is about an area of Paris, not about a castle of a particular color. And the reason why I'm joking about whether I'm going to be in one of your novels is these things that are called novels, and I would argue that some of them are more or less novelistic. They sit in some strange place. The Amit Chaudhuri novel is, I would argue, some combination of a memoir, a novel, and an essay all at the same time. And this one even has, I haven't read all of your novels, has lots of places that it verges on like free verse and that there's lots of breaks on the page. It's not written the way free verse is usually with the poetic rhythm, but also if you've ever flipped open a book of poetry, and noticed that there's the words are not all over the page, but in fact they're spaced out. There's pages like that in Chateau Rouge. So I'm going to even throw in a little bit of poetry there. So this is the first thing to talk about is how did this novel come to be and how should we think about it and why should we call it a novel, which I think is where we started last time, but I find it irresistible.
Um, so the novel began to happen. Um, I'm using that word instead, instead of using a term like I began to think of writing the novel. The novel began to happen when my wife made that remark, which I record in the book, and so everything that leads up to that remark is more or less as it happened when I arrived in Paris. I have to say, belatedly, I mm, should have been there maybe 3 weeks before I finally got there. But it's a bizarre story. I had to change my visa in England, where I was working for part of the year, in order to to take time off from my teaching that term and go to Paris. And the visa arrived with the efficiency of the UK bureaucracy. With it was supposed to be a 5 year uh, tier one global talent visa. I had to apply for that because it was simply the only one which would allow me to sort of do things like this and go off to Paris in the middle of my job. Uh, and it arrived, and it was valid for a day. So it was like it was supposed to be instead of stamping, whatever it should have been 2023, they had stamped the next day's date and the same year. So then I had to get in touch with them, which is, it sounds like something that's doable, but actually it's a completely different uh, ball game altogether. So I arrived in Paris late, and then I get into this apartment. I firstly find myself walking around, searching for their apartment, and uh, thinking to myself, well, this isn't the typical Parisian area, the kind I've been to in the past on visits. And it is largely, I would say, West African migrant working class. So I was making kind of sense of all of that. And then I entered the apartment, and I found that it was not at all in a good state of repair. And so I began to panic and think that I can't spend the next 8 or 9 months in this apartment because it needs work. Um, but then my mind was also diverted by other things, the fact that I needed to eat something and that my wife and daughter were arriving on a different train from London, and that they would be here in about a couple of hours. So when my wife finally and daughter, when they finally arrived, um, my wife sort of sympathized with me and noted that the fact that the apartment was in disrepair. Uh, but at a certain point, I think sensing my frustration and panic, because my first thought was to get out of the apartment that very evening, get into a hotel, and then look for another place with the help of the institute that had invited me. Um, and she made this remark, that, but if Hemingway had been here, this is where he would have been living, not in that other Paris, not in a made-up Paris, the fancy Paris that we know as Paris. I hadn't really had the benefit of reading at that time A Movable Feast, which is a book she likes very much and which I like now as well, having read it. But at that time I hadn't. And but she had the benefit of having access Paris as a less of a fixed artifact, which had Parisian qualities, but which was just a place that was unfurling, uh, becoming itself. And these writers and artists found themselves in the midst of that flux. And that must have been one of the things that they were um, energized by as artists and writers in New York or in Calcutta were energized by the kind of the flux, the lack of fixity that kind of adhered to their cities. The moment they became fixed, the moment New York began to become fixed in its kind of definition and cleaned up as a result, in the early 2000s, I think it became a much less interesting place, and its creative possibilities kind of diminished. So this is what Paris would have been like, not announcing itself as being Parisian at every kind of step or in every moment. And the moment she said that, it seemed to me that I something had opened up conceptually, experientially, and the novel, as it were, had begun to exist. And for me, uh, if I write about reality, it's never in the sense of writing about reality. That I have, I'm not a portrait painter. Um, I'm not somebody who's reporting on reality, documenting it, representing it, describing it. Um, it 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 kind of very often begins with the separation between reality and text beginning to waver. So the novel doesn't necessarily imply an act of writing, sitting down to write. And that is part of what happens, but that's only one part of what happens. The novel doesn't come into existence as a domain of meaning uh, only after I've gathered experience, which I then turn into some form of writing. Um, the difference between experience and writing begins to waver, really.
Mm.
And that is what happened at that moment. The difference between life and writing, experience and writing, uh, was beginning to fall away after she made that comment. I suddenly realized I was in the middle of something, and that's how it began. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I found this book absolutely fascinating, and I am, of course, there's no way you could have known this before this conversation because I didn't tell you. I have been obsessed with this question um since I was an undergraduate actually, and first read the works of Walker Percy in my very first literature class in college. And Walker Percy, who was very interested in Fringe existentialism and also semiotics, was obsessed, just absolutely obsessed with this question of how do you see a place when you have already seen that place in fiction, in movies, in postcards? And the answer, I mean, the short answer is you can't. So you can't actually see Paris when you go to Paris. When you go there, Percy says, and I've taught this to students so many times, and some of them embrace it, some of it hate it. When you go to Paris, all you can try and do is see Hemingway's Paris. Or there's a Netflix show. It's called like Emily in Paris or something. I don't remember, but it's about a young woman in Paris, and for a whole new set of generation, there's this sense now of what Paris is. And so when people go to Paris, they can't actually see the city. They can only see their preconceived notion of what the city is, with the irony that this preconceived notion was created by, among other people, Hemingway, who went to a Paris that had been destroyed by World War One. It didn't look like this. It was burnt out. All the apartments were wrecked. And in fact, the semiotician Umberto Eco calls this hyperreality. No one has ever actually been in the Paris that we imagine when we read A Movable Feast. It only ever existed as an image. And then to see Paris when you go to Paris is like that's the one thing you can't see is Paris. If any of that makes sense.
Yes. Yes. Well, I mean, this is one of the things that I point out in the book that Hemingway himself didn't have access to Hemingway's Paris.
Yeah.
He didn't go out and look for the place where Hemingway had coffee or dinner, right? So I found that possibility. Um, I found that very difficult. I find that I think that's very difficult to achieve, as you say rightly, in Paris. but once you achieve it, or once you get access to a Paris that is not inflected with, you know, this idea of this is where Hemingway had lunch, this is where Proust went for a walk, etc., or where he slept. Once you have access to that Paris, you begin to have a truer sense of the historical. Um, and and this is what which is what must have happened to must have been true for Hemingway, must have been true for Van Gogh and Gauguin, those derelict cafes
Yeah.
at which they used to hang out, argue, and exchange ideas and thoughts because that was what they could afford. Um, they must have had access to that kind of history uh, simply by being in the present, not by being burdened by being in the Paris of Gauguin or Van Gogh,
Yeah.
you know. And this this possibility suddenly became available to me through the whole Chateau Rouge, Rue des Poissonniers, Rue Poulet, Boulevard Barbès, that area. It became possible to live in Paris in that way, in that open-ended way, uh, and to look at the construction of Paris, the rest of Paris, to look at the way in which it had been constructed, and to unpick it as well, to sort of, as my wife seemed to be doing in a completely unconscious but very perceptive way, when she would say, "Well, people live above the grocers, they live above the restaurant. It's a lived-in city." And so to begin to look at both the grocers and the restaurant and the cafe and that building in a different kind of way, its rhythms in a different kind of way, to unpick the construct, and then also, yeah, to be energized by being in a place that was historical precisely because it had no such definition. Um, so yeah, it was energizing, it was liberating in a way, and it made you it, yeah, it brought a spring to your step, as I say in the book. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've only been to Paris once in my life, just for a couple of days with my wife, and we stayed near Saint-Sulpice. I mean, we stayed in like the ultimate, old Paris feeling. And then, but I knew I didn't want to go to the Louvre because I'd heard it was just overcrowded and touristy, and I wanted to see this amazing view I'd heard about at Sacré-Cœur. So I dropped my wife off at the Louvre. She wanted to go to the Louvre, and I took a street. I think it was probably Rue Poissonnet. I
Yes.
was looking at it on Google Maps before our talk, and I just looked at it and I was like, this will be like an hour walk or something. I love to walk. I was a marathoner at the time, and I walked, and the Paris that I had been staying in disappeared. And it definitely felt like the majority population was African. I would have guessed this was like 2013. I would have guessed North African. I got my really good Parisian story, which is one of the public bathrooms, the loos, the water closet was malfunctioning, and there was a middle-aged man who was trying to get into it, and he was very angry. And finally, he just unzipped his pants. I mean, on the street in broad daylight, pulled his penis out, and pissed all over the side of the malfunctioning toilet. And I was just like, well, this is, I didn't see that. Uh, I didn't see that in the square in front of Saint-Sulpice, and you don't see that at Shakespeare and Company. And I eventually got to Sacre-Cœur and had to fight my way through all the people, all the African immigrants trying to sell you trinkets, and got my amazing view. And it did feel like I had seen something, real, but it's also discomforting because you came for Paris, you, you know. and it's hard to hold them together. And then the other problem is there's always the danger. Like, I mean, when we mentioned we were going to Paris, people in the UK, one of the things they said pretty frequently is that people piss on the streets there. So even that, unpleasant experience was nevertheless somehow fit my preconceived notion of what Paris should be. And now that we have this book, Chateau Rouge, that has a picture of African immigrants in Paris on the cover, fewer people are going to read your book than A Movable Feast, I think. But people are going to start going to Paris to find this thing. I mean, it seems like it is in some ways in inescapable, this process.
But I lived, I mean, as again, as the book describes, I wasn't far away from the Sacre-Cœur at all. Um, and when you're in that area, the kind of Rue de Poissonnière, Chateau Rouge, you wouldn't know the proximity of Montmartre and Sacré-Cœur. Um, what was it that I wanted to respond to?
I mean,
Uh,
take your time.
yeah, there were a couple of things that came to mind. Anyway, they'll probably come back to me. Um, I mean, it yeah, obviously you realize that it wasn't as if I was trying to showcase the diversity of Paris. Um, I Paris must have been a very diverse place, and it is a diverse place if you look at it, and the creativity must lie in that diversity, which is why I think, I mean, for me, the counterparts of these West Africans are, I mean, they had their ancestors in Paris, of course. I mean, I mean, there have been African neighborhoods and African immigration for a long time, but also I mean, kind of the Europeans themselves in the early 20th century as sort of counterpart to the kind of the milling of Africans that we see in that neighborhood now, in the sense that those Europeans are also breaking away from something, and they're probably misfits in any environment, and they're sort of only at ease in this state of what you call a discomfiture of being badly aligned uh, to what an idea of a European city should be like. So uh, um, you don't you don't get a sense of that misalignment and the freedom that it brings in most of the bits of Paris because they're so dead and curated. It's not as if there's nothing worth seeing there. There's a lot that's worth seeing. But again, to see something over there again beyond the very striking roads and buildings, uh, again, you have to have that kind of connection to a, to a rhythm of life, which my wife casually pointed out to me in the sense of the people living above the restaurant. I went to have dinner with a few people there, poets and writers, when I was there between 2018 and 19, and some of them actually did. But a couple of people, like the Jacques Rancière, whom I portray briefly in this book, actually lived very close above a cafe. But there were other writers, Dan Gunn, I think his name is, who lived in an apartment which was just above a kind of line of restaurants were full of tourists. Once you went to his apartment, you wouldn't know that they were down
Mm.
there. You know, you really were cut off from them, and then you'd come out again. So in those areas that you're talking about, outside of Chateau Rouge, I think there is a way of connecting to the life that goes on there, but very difficult to see it. Um, but my sort of yeah my interest was in this kind of um, opening out within Paris, of discovering uh, discovering a way of living there, and thinking about it in a way that's not doesn't have to be tied to the preconceived, to what we already know. There was no conscious decision on my part to do that. I would have happily gone on living unhappily in a static environment, a static idea of Paris. In fact, that's what the narrator of the book wants to do initially. The narrator of the book is somebody who hmm, dislikes the idea of this dead curated Paris, and yet faced with this abyss of this completely unfixed continuum of what Chateau Rouge is, something that makes no sense to him as Paris at all, and of course the important to point out the apartment in a state of disrepair. He he thinks to himself, a part of him must think that, God, I'm going to spend 9 months in Paris, but I'm never actually going to be able to live in the Paris that I deride. I want to live in that Paris. I want to live in Proust's Paris. But I want to complain about it. I want to complain about Paris. I want to complain about the fact that it's um, so museum-like, so sort of packaged in a way by globalization, because this is a post-globalization sort of reality that we see, and then when that kind of possibility, the option, the alternative of being in Paris proper, where this man could live and grumble at the same time about how false and curated Paris is, when that possibility is taken away from him, he begins to panic. He doesn't know what to do in this new place, which bears no resemblance to Paris at all, until he realizes that this is where he has to be.
Yeah, I mean that's I mean where he has to be or where he should be if he wants to see Paris, or is it both?
No, it's not where he should be. I mean, I don't think the his wife's observation was meant. First, it was meant to calm him down, of course, but then it was connected to something genuine in her memory, and her kind of the way Paris in her mind was associated with not only a movable feast, but maybe the kind of area that Hemingway lived in and the disrepair that his own house was in. That
Yeah.
she had sort of internalized and remembered, and so she um, didn't just associate Paris with the Jardin Luxembourg, which is also there, I think, in A Movable Feast, but with the kind of bathroom that needed fixing.
Yeah.
And so that's why she must have made that comment, that there's more to Paris than, Hemingway and the Jardin Luxembourg. There is also the bathroom that needs fixing, uh, and and um, and this would have given to the man, the narrator, some sort of brought him some sort of creative excitement. Uh, there is no way he would have gone on living there as just as an act of reparation, or as an act of research, or just to pursue a program of seeing a different side of Paris. It's deeply connected to creative excitement. The creative excitement begins then at that point, and
Okay.
then everything around him becomes changed as a result.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. I mean, this is, I'm probably writing this idea too hard, but as I said, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. One of my something that comes up in the book is the burning of Notre Dame and the desire to put it back the way it was. And I learned about this at the time, and I learned, and I don't think this was widely covered. That big, but it's obvious. If you go and see all the medieval churches in all of Europe, none of them have a giant iron spire that looks like it could have been made uh, like by the man who made the Eiffel Tower, because that's not 12th century or 14th century technology. Notre Dame, the Notre Dame that we think is what Notre Dame should look like, is in fact a 19th century renovation. But because the Notre Dame that has been fixed by impressionist paintings and new wave cinema in our minds has that spire. When Notre Dame burned in the 19th century, they were like, okay, great, this is a beautiful building and we can make it a new beautiful building that expresses our desires. When it burned in the 21st century, we looked at it and said, okay, we need to make it look exactly like its authors intended it to look. And in our ignorance, we thought its authors were the 19th century people when they absolutely were not. And I greatly fear this law, like what you were talking about on the very small scale of the individual in the city, the writer. I fear that Paris itself has become trapped. If it wants to rebuild its greatest icon to look like how it's supposed to look on the postcard, neither how people want it to look today, nor how it looked originally. But if Hemingway's Paris is controlling what Paris is supposed to look like, I see that as a loss of creativity broadly.
Yeah. By the way, I remember what it is. The other thing I wanted to
Oh
tell
yes,
you.
go for it.
Yeah, which is connected to what you just said. Notre Dame, and this is not far from Notre Dame, which is Shakespeare and Company,
Yes.
and and Shakespeare and Company. I mean, I've I've given a reading there, and I've also gone up, right up to the attic, where they have a small room with a bed and a study table, um, for writers who have maybe come from outstation and want to spend the night, need to spend the night. Um, but it also has photographs of where the old Shakespeare and Company was, and what the area was like before it became sort of built upon, on the foundation of which this particular Shakespeare and Company came up. And the area was like basically a ditch.
Yeah.
So basically, what you begin to understand is how much Paris has been in flux, how much it is um, a creation, and then at a certain point, when you begin to disallow that creation from, well, first take it out of its history, the history being that kind of smudgy photograph of the ditch. Uh, when you take it out of that history and you kind of begin to behave as if that Paris that came up in the 19th century was always there, then the creation becomes invention, as it were, and we want to always confront that invention. Um, so so I mean, little things would give me hints uh, towards the fact that the Paris that we saw was a shifting Paris, and and yes, I mean Paris's reputation as Paris kind of goes back a long way, but the attempt to fix it as Paris, as having certain characteristics, may have accelerated with globalization.
Hmm.
Which brought in gentrification in various parts of the world, so that we could go to old towns, certain neighborhoods, and then come out of them again, but experience a little bit of what it used to feel like, the vibrancy, and then come back, come out. But what you're saying of Paris is true of the West. It's true of Europe. It's true of the West. In that the West is now it's now an invention, really. It no longer has the kind of vitality uh, which which was composed of a huge, not just racial but intellectual multiplicity and diversity, uh, which was going off in various directions and could only go off in so many directions if the place didn't already have a kind of frozen identity. It was only possible for Picasso to sort of be excited by those African masks in the Trocadero Museum or wherever those interfaces or for Gauguin and Monet or Van Gogh to be collecting those Japanese prints. Uh, only if the it's only possible if that kind of if the West has not frozen into something. It's that unfrozen West in which all of this is going on. Um, and so what we are saying about Paris is not true of the West, in which I would include America. That there is a kind of fixity about understanding what the West is, what its forebears are, uh, and stepping out of that is very, very difficult. Just kind of making gestures towards diversity or decolonization doesn't do the trick. You actually have to experience something outside of it and think about that as to why it's exciting you. To sort of think, no, 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 the West is this is all of it is a 19th century invention which has never had as much fixity as it has in the time of globalization. Never has kind of this 19th century version of Europe or the West become just a kind of inert category as it has after globalization or with globalization.
Yeah, I completely agree. I completely think it is a factor of globalization, but I also am very I do think there's a mistaken counter impulse, which is, I mean, maybe you could describe it as Orientalist, which is, the West is frozen. Let's go to the place where the people are real, where society still exists, where things are authentic. And I mean, I think to a certain extent that's what Gauguin is doing, right? Is like, oh well, everyone here is frozen and has ceased to find the flux, but there are other places where people are real, and that carries with it a great danger of turning those people into, grist for your mill of authenticity.
Absolutely, yeah. But I think Gauguin, whatever his intentions were, uh, avoids that Orientalist kind of impulse towards representation
Hmm.
in his work. His work is so formalistic, is so kind of immersed in color and form that it completely breaks away from the representational kind of ideology of the Enlightenment, and so creates a kind of liberated space. Whatever we might think of him as a person and what he
Yeah.
was thinking, you know, that's why his work has meant a lot to kind of artists from different parts of the world, including India, all of whom were trying to get out of that kind of dead academic art or representational art. So yeah, the question is how to leave your more facile ideas of representation and diversity behind and work with the material itself. There is no easy way of doing that.
Yeah, anyone who listens to this show knows that I talk a lot about movies, including movies that are often pretty obscure and people haven't seen. So I'll just say this. There's a movie, I think it's called Tokyo Ga. I have mentioned it on this podcast before by the filmmaker Wim Wenders. He goes to Tokyo and he wants to find Ozu's Tokyo, and Ozu is one of my favorite directors. And he meets while he's there his old friend, this director who's now much more famous, this crazy man named Werner Herzog. And Herzog's in this documentary film, and Herzog says, there's nothing here. They've covered it all up. It's civilization everywhere. It's just concrete. I need to go to the jungle and find, where it's real. And I'm just of the mind that Herzog is absolutely wrong about this, that there's so much interesting stuff going on in Tokyo despite it being concrete. It is vibrant even in the 80s, but this facile idea of what authenticity was is what Herzog has, and it takes someone calmer and more patient than the wild man Werner Herzog to see the kind of thing that you saw in Chateau Rouge, and that I think even someone like Ozu sees in these really boring Japanese household where really all that matters is Satsuko Hara going to get to choose who she marries. This is the plot of like 9 of Ozu's final 17 movies, and yet the vibrancy of the life in those films is just immense, but it won't be apparent to you if you want samurai and the Kurosawa image of Japan.
Right, absolutely. Tokyo Guy is a wonderful documentary, and he spends a lot of time sort of also with people who make facsimiles of
Yeah, the
food
fake
items.
food, yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's just wonderful. I think Ozu himself is a great de-orientalizer. I mean, I use that term for him because Orientalists who are basically products of the Enlightenment.
Mhm.
Yeah, Orientalists can come in all shapes, sizes, and races. So and I've written about this before. I mean, the main kind of work of Orientalism in India has been done by Indians. You know, it's not as if they're people coming from outside only producing representations of India. Those representations of India have been produced within India, and then you have artists like Manikal or Satyajit Ray arguing against that and opening up a completely different space, sometimes with the very same material.
Mm.
Like with Manikal, it might be the village in Duvitha, which in a different kind of Indian film would become the Orient, or would become India. So Ozu himself is doing that, as you say. I mean, with his material. I mean, which is Japanese modernity,
Yeah.
really. It's those houses, it's the railway lines, it's going from one place to another on a train, arriving, walking, and then going back, walking around in the afternoon and going back home, or buying a bicycle or taking a bicycle, cycling with your daughter to the edge of the town and having a conversation and coming back. Extraordinary. Uh, an extraordinary kind of way of making us understand that you don't go looking elsewhere
Mhm.
for Japan. In the here and now, this is all that it is. It is quite banal. It is full of a kind of poetry that excites Ozu, but it takes that moment for him to begin to see it. Otherwise, if he didn't see it, he would be shackled, like people from outside are in that search for Japan. He has to break out of that. Wenders recognizes this fact, and he goes on his own search among the banal
Yeah.
himself, I think. Yeah, absolutely. I love
Uh,
that documentary.
yeah, no, that's so wonderful. And then, that's the work that Herzog can't do. He can never find it in the banal. The man
Oh,
flees from it. And I like many of Herzog's films, and he's done very interesting stuff with the wild and the primitive and the savage, especially the savagery underneath Europeans and Enlightenment thinking that is not supposed to exist. But he can't see the beating heart, as you say, of modernity and the mundane. Herzog's blind to it, or at least is unable to turn it into art.
Maybe he's a kind of descendant of, Friedrich, the painter Caspar
Yeah.
Friedrich, or a seeker of the Burkean sublime, you
Yes.
know. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's right. And I think, one of my greatest struggles. I mean, when I was a kid, I mostly read science fiction and fantasy. And when people first started trying to get me to read novels of manners, which I mean, I just devour novels of manners now. I love Edith Wharton. I've even come around to Jane Austen after all of these years. And when I would pick these books up, I couldn't see what mattered in them. I couldn't see why I cared. I wanted someone with a lightsaber striking down the emperor. That was what I was looking for. And the idea that what really mattered was who got the best seat on the couch, which does come up in some of these novels of manners, or even worse, like whether you're going to marry the second richest man in the county or the fourth richest man in the county. I couldn't see what was alive and vibrant and exciting and terrifying about those things because I had no way into it.
I think I mean, who gets the best seat on the couch? That's a very important thing, you know, for a writer like me. That is where you know, where what it's about. Yeah,
Yes, yes, I agree. I agree, and that's why, that your books. There's the old joke that the show Seinfeld is about nothing. It's not quite true, and your books are also not about nothing, but they're about the mundane and the everyday enough that they will look like they are about nothing to someone who is unwilling to descend to that level of the questioning.
right.
So we've actually covered everything that I wanted to talk about, and I wasn't planning on bringing up Ozu, but I'm so glad I did because the Ozu it fits so well. And I'll just save any questions I have about Satyajit Ray for a future talk. I already talked enough about him last time. Is there anything else you would like to say about the book or anything else?
Not really. It's great. I think we've covered quite a lot, and yeah,
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Well, this has been a pleasure as always. I do hope we overlap enough in Oxford to get coffee or
yes,
tea or something. We'll see.
absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
Drop me
and
a text or a line when you're here.
yes, I certainly will. And it looks like you've got more books coming out eventually with New York Review Books. So let's do this again
Oh yeah,
sometime.
reissues next year. That's
Okay,
true.
all right. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, no, I mean, and I haven't, I think Dishes Abroad, I mean, I haven't read that one, so I'll be in touch with them and I'll
Yeah.
be in touch and hopefully I'll see
Now
you
that the
in
Odyssey is out, now that
Yes. I
everybody's
haven't
talking about the Odyssey.
I have
Yeah.
I haven't seen that movie. I must admit it looks like exactly the opposite of the kind of thing that we're talking about. It looks
It is.
like
Well, um, Graham, I actually saw the movie a couple of nights ago
okay.
with my
And
wife, and I went um, screaming and wailing because I don't like Christopher Nolan uh, and his work. I mean, I don't like his work. What I've seen of it. Maybe I'm mainly thinking of Inception and Dunkirk. I don't like those films. This one, because I went with such low expectations, I thought that it was much better than I thought it would be. It kind of loses its way towards the end, the fight scene, uh, when it becomes more like the kind of films you'd expect
Hmm,
to be part of its baggage,
yeah.
like a Gladiator or Troy or whatever. It becomes more like that. But before that, the filmmaking is quite scene by scene. It's quite economical. Of course, there are kind of gigantic creatures and all of that, but it was better than I expected. I went in a very prejudiced kind of frame of mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess I don't know if I'll leave this in, but I guess I'll just have to say that, I've been feeling I've liked many of Nolan's films and disliked others, especially his earlier films. Memento was one of my favorites. That was a long time ago before he was such
Yeah.
a austere and kind of authoritarian filmmaker, but
Mm.
I will try to get out there and see it at least. So my friend, the one who mentioned listening to our podcast episode, he's going to see it and he said, I don't want to see this movie, but I can't I feel so left out of the conversation right now.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
if you haven't seen Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, are you really alive in 2026? That's the problem.
This is what these big historical moments are about. I mean, you have to you want to be a part of them, otherwise, you get left out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, one last thing I'll say. This is not to you. This is to everyone listening. You've heard me talk about Ozu many times. Amit Chaudhuri and I, we both endorse this filmmaker Ozu. And let me just recommend to everyone, if you've never seen an Ozu film, the movie I always recommend, it's called Good Morning or Ohio in Japanese. It is like all of Ozu's films, mundane and sad, but it's also told from the perspective of children, and it's funny, and it has fart jokes in it. And if you ask anyone what Ozu film to watch, they will tell you Tokyo Story, which is 2.5 hours long, black and white, and is a remake of a Hollywood melodrama about how sad it is when your parents get old and die. And so if you watch Tokyo Story as your first Ozu film, you may wish to never watch any more Ozu again, although it was my first Ozu film. And so I just want to recommend Good Morning to everyone. It's a cute story about Japanese children making sense of of Japanese modernity, precisely as you say, and it goes down a lot easier than Tokyo Story.
Yeah. No, I like Tokyo Story too. That too was my first um, Ozu film. But there's another film which my wife used to keep talking about, which she'd seen when she used to live in Pune, where the Pune Film and Television Institute was, and the students used to get to watch amazing films every week. This is a film called by Ozu called I Was Born But.
Yes.
which is also children, which is
Yes.
also mainly about children, which is a wonderful film. Again, pre-war, right?
Pre-war. Yes.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and Ozu made a couple of very propagandistic films during the war, which is very strange, and they're very subtly propagandistic. But they're just one of them. It's called like the story of a father or something like that. But it's just about
haven't
in
seen
in
that.
in the classic Ozu way. It's just about like a man and his father and how they fail to really reconcile. But the reason why they fail to reconcile is that the father is just so dedicated to the war effort, and it's very subtle, but just throughout the film, I mean, the war isn't mentioned, it's just like working in the factory or something, but it's very clear that the message of that movie was do everything you can to support Japan's efforts to win World War II. And it's a very strange sensation when you're used to the later melancholic, bittersweet Ozu to have it suffused with Japanese nationalism. The two flavors don't go well together, in my opinion. But it's Ozu was a person who lived in Japan in the 1940s, and as such, that had
Yeah.
to be part of his cinema at some point. Okay, well, I've taken you a little too long again talking about Ozu. Thank you so much, and hopefully I'll see you soon.
See you soon, Graham. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.